We're live, and I'm here talking with Jason Matthews about founding fathers at SD HisCon. It can't get much better than that. Jason, how are you?
I am well. It is a not unpleasant day in Washington in June, so that's we'll call that a win.
Yes, yes. Well, good for you. And we don't have cherry blossoms yet, do we? No, that's
They've
in
come and
March.
gone, sir. They're
All
we're
right.
waiting
I
on
don't.
2027 for them now.
What about mosquitoes? Do we have mosquitoes?
We do. We have a lot of. I mean the swamp, the metaphorical mostly is also just a geographic reality of the area. So lots of bugs of all varieties.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm always, when I hang out there for any period of time, go on the walking tours to look around all the magnificent stuff that's there in DC. I'm just always shocked by the sheer quantity of mosquitoes. But you're right. It's the history. It's what it was built on.
Yeah, exactly. Gnats, very big on gnats also. Not the baseball, though, starting with a G and ATS.
I thought I always thought swamp referred to the political process.
Sure, it makes a convenient analogy, but it's also topography.
Yeah. And it may very well be why the founding fathers met in Philadelphia.
Absolutely. It's certainly although Philadelphia not much better, of course, and lots of the historical record is dotted with their complaints about both the heat and flies in Philadelphia. So
Yeah. Now, I guess the choice would have been Philadelphia or Alexandria to get as close to DC as you could at the time. Isn't that right?
yeah, exactly.
Now, is
Exactly.
Alexandria mosquito laden?
Very much so. Also kind of low lying, and it's sort of as as far as a hometown goes, it's George Washington's hometown
Oh, and your current town.
and my current town.
Yeah,
Exactly.
very
We have a lot
nice.
in common, obviously.
Well, it's
George
come
and
a
I.
long way in 250 years. Uh,
Uh,
Alexandrians.
and yet it hasn't.
So true. So this is in the context of your career. So we have Twilight Struggles, your first game. And I'm not sure why you make another game after you make Twilight Struggle, but you decided that you were going to make something else.
Yeah.
And was this the first follow? No, no, the
This is
1960 was the
yeah,
follow.
this is the third game. Yeah.
Okay. So
And the hardest.
1960,
The hardest.
1960, an election game, presidents.
Yeah.
Then we go to the history. And of course, this is a game that you designed with Chris, right?
Yep.
How did you guys get to know each other and develop an interest in working together?
We'd he we had a gaming group here in DC that he appeared uh to one day just kind of out of random, and we became good friends, and he kind of pushed to do the election game because he was like, I think an election game is a good application for a CDG system, and I agreed with him. And it also allowed me to correct some other thing that I didn't like about most election games, which was that they tend to be about generic elections and have no context. Whereas I think all of the interesting parts of an election are the historical context, the economic context, what's going on. That's what makes an election interesting, and how do candidates maneuver around those questions. So we did that together, and then there was we were approached actually by Jim Dietz, who at the time ran a company called Jolly Roger Games, um, and Jim is a junior college historian or history professor, and he wanted us to do another game. And to be honest, the first game that I ever had like floating around in the back of my head was this subject. And so I suggested it to Chris and to Jim, and they were for it, and we proceeded from there. The other thing, almost all of my designs, I'm like trying to work at a specific problem, and in this case, we done Twilight Struggle, which is sort of like introducing Euro mechanisms to war gamers, and 1960 is introducing war game approaches to Euro gamers. And this game was an attempt to make a multiplayer card-driven game in a respectable amount of time. We have Here I Stand and some other. At the time, we had other examples of multiplayer games, the Napoleonic Wars, but they all kind of played in the same time frame as a classical long multiplayer 68-hour kind of affair, and we were looking to do something much tighter.
Well, you certainly accomplished that, and
that's the hope.
It's interesting to hear about Jim Dietz. I had no idea that he was associated with your early work, and certainly still has publishing impact on the hobby, right? With
Indeed.
So that's all very interesting. I was going to ask about Jolly Roger. What and you selected Jolly Roger as opposed to a GMT at the time?
No, he really solicited us. And I don't, GMT, even now, GMT is very kind of a little bit hands off about these things. It was like no one at GMT was like pounding on my door saying, "When's your sequel to Twilight Struggle?"
Yeah.
In more recent times, Gene has been a little more like, "Hey, it might be nice." It's never a command, but it's all now. I at least get a suggestion. But in the immediate aftermath of Twilight Struggle, that didn't happen. So I didn't really feel any compunction to be like, well, I need to show this to GMT first, because they weren't asking.
Right. Which, by the way, I think is one of the great things about designing with GMT, right?
Yeah, that's right. It is very low pressure, and but they pay regularly, and they provide an accounting and these other things that tragically have not found to be universal experiences in the hobby.
Interesting. Well, that's the topic for another
show for sure.
Yeah. No, it's quite interesting, and I think many of us just want to get a design out and are happy to get it published, and all of those details we don't think about all that much with the first game. So it's nice that your Twilight Struggle and My Liberty or Death are with GMT, because that means that the check comes with regularity and is calculated properly, and has been for me for a short period of time, and for you probably a long period of time. So
yeah, it is nice not to have to like follow up, or I know someone like Knizia. Obviously, I'm not trying to compare myself to Reiner Knizia and his and the number of games he has in publication, but he has to have an assistant to basically hound game companies to get his royalty checks.
Yes, it's worth it to pay the assistant to do
yeah,
that.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is the great irony. Yeah, I like transactions where they're very large and you get a very large piece all at once, and there's no more accounting. That's my favorite type of transaction. They're hard to find in this hobby.
A little bit, unfortunately, yeah.
So you said you were carrying around this issue, this problem, this message that you wanted to send to the world with you for a while. Is this something that your interest in the American Revolution and the formation of the Declaration or the Constitution? Sorry, is that something you've pondered since you were in college, or what's the genesis?
Yeah, I had an amazing educational experience um, during undergrad, uh, back when Thomas Jefferson had just established the University of Virginia. Um, we had this thing at my little liberal arts school that they called interim, and it was like in January you took a month long, maybe it was 6 weeks, I don't remember, a class, but it was just a single class, and you kind of attended it all day. And I took a class on the Constitutional Convention, and we went day by day through Madison's notes and the other notes that were available, um, and went through the whole debates and process, and you learn the personalities, and it was such a rich and interesting experience. It put the thought that this should be a game somehow in the back of my head.
Yeah. Yeah. And how did you visualize it as a game? Were you a gamer at the time?
Yeah, I was already a gamer, and there wasn't, I guess at the time, there wasn't a ton of language for what I wanted to do then, because we didn't have card driven systems yet. And there were, of course, political games. I guess if I had designed a game in the late 80s about the subject, it just would have been another kind of overwrought, hardwired political rules kind of game. Um, something on like a Civilization kind of scale, or Pax Britannica, or one of those things that took forever and played in real time in this case. So uh, better to have let the state of the art evolve a little bit before this was tried, I think.
And did you have a prototype or something mechanics in mind before you got to 1960?
I think I was that I didn't have a prototype. I was really, this was, obviously before I'd really tried my hand at design. It was just like one of these things that ruminates in the shower or on a drive or whatever the hell, where you're like, there's something there, and how would I go about it? Um, the you know there were political games available, as I say, the Divine Right, some other diplomacy, I guess. And I think originally, and this is a criticism of founding fathers, I think is quite fair. Originally, I conceived this as more of a negotiation game, because at least there that sort of game and that language for that sort of game already existed. Um, and founding fathers does not actually have a real negotiation element to it.
Interesting. Divine Right. I have great memories of playing Divine Right, and I guess it can be construed as a political game, but I think you really missed an opportunity when you missed the casting a meteor onto the stack of units at hex X4 and then just rolling to see which ones die.
Which one dies exactly?
Yeah. Yeah, and if the British had had that at the time, it would have been a different
It
negotiation.
definitely would have turned out differently, for sure.
That's awesome. So when did so post 1960 then is when we see a first prototype, and what were the mechanics? I love hearing about mechanics that you included early but didn't use. It's a long time ago, Jason. I'm asking you to
It
go
is a
way
long
back.
time ago. And like, the answer to your question is almost limitless, because we struggled so hard to um, make this game playable in the amount of time that we had it. There are like multiple layers of problems. In a regular CDG, I'm only worried about the implication of my card play to my opponent and vice versa. But when you play a multiplayer CDG, the range of bizarre combinations of things that can happen just like go exponentially, because you have three more players who are also throwing cards in that have weird impacts that you don't anticipate. So that was one problem. The main problem that we really just like fought to overcome was the reading phase, because all CDGs have this, I've got card text. In my first couple plays, I've got to read the card text, and there the game would come to a screeching halt. And so how big should the hand size be? I can't even tell you how many iterations of hand size we went through. Probably from 6 down to wherever we got it to 4, I guess. And in addition, then you want, we essentially had to shift to at one point in time, everything was on everything was, all candidates and whatever were observable, and you would pull them up. And then again, you had this weird reading phase where people were sitting and reading all of the candidate powers, and so that brought the game to an unpleasant conclusion. And so we had to start incorporating blind information, or like blind drawing, but also still providing your opponents with some information about what was in your hand, which is why Founding Fathers has this unusual mechanism that on the back of every Founding Fathers card, you know what state that person is from. And so it gives you some limited information about everybody else's
Big state,
hand.
small state.
Yeah, big state, small state. Right, exactly. If you're an expert in the game or the Constitutional Convention, you can actually sort of derive who it is by who's out already and that sort of thing. But anyway, so yes, this question of how to get people to play faster, how to give them meaningful choices, but not overwhelm them with options. That was a really delicate, hard line to walk in this game.
Yeah. Well, that's maybe true for every game, right? I mean, you've succinctly laid out a handful of considerations that are just critically important, and you can give somebody tons of decisions, you can give them all kinds of interesting decisions, but if you encumber it with so many rules and so many exceptions and so many details, the game ain't much fun, it's just not as fun as it could be, right? I think
I guess that's right.
Yeah,
but if you encumber a game, like, to use Imperial Struggle as a contrast, if you encumber a game, but it's a 2-player game, you don't, because everything that your opponent does actually matters to you, it feels less disengaging. But if you're in a multiplayer game and you're worried about a bunch of weird exceptions, or people are suffering from analysis paralysis, it just totally takes the fun right out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It does. So your inclusion of the personalities was critical, right? I don't think you can do this without the inclusion of the personalities, the people. And
I mean,
you start the game with the random.
Very conveniently, there are 55 of them. So a standard print run of a card sheet for a board game is 110. So it's just like magic that it's built for this. And there are interesting stories attached to everyone. We tried, this was less hard than fun. I think this was mostly fun, trying to match the personality somehow of the figure at the Constitutional Convention to their actual impact on the convention. So we're stretching a little bit here and there, but in general, I think it gives nice flavor if you're paying attention.
Yeah, and the competition for renown is an interesting measure, right? Because it's in no way objective. It's a subjective measure of renown, but it's great fun to see, when a game like this, I love to see what the designer thinks is the scoring for renown. And then, when I'm playing the game, I want to call you and say, "Hey, Jason, 5? Come on, give me a break."
It, yeah, I mean, in that sense, the approach of the game is a little bit cynical, not like grossly cynical. It's and obviously it's not Charles Beard making all of this a Marxist exercise, but the central conceit is that you are worried about being known as the father of the Constitution, and there is historical record for this. Like that part's not made up. Madison is very worried about it, and he has a little bit of a rivalry with Pinckney, who is another very important founder. And there's some decent evidence that uh, that Madison sort of writes him out of the notes so that he appears less important than he actually was.
It's very interesting. The other thing that strikes me about this is this Virginia plan, which I love. But what a great, and anybody that's been in a meeting where you're trying to build consensus knows that you lay it out and you make your arguments first, and you start pulling people on board as opposed to waiting for somebody else to lay out the straw man, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
And I was it because of were the Virginians held in such esteem that they were allowed to do that? I mean, or was it just their a gutsy play?
I think it's a little bit of both. Like, it's not an accident. The Virginians are aware that they want to be the first mover, and if they put their plan down first, that's going to give them some advantages. Obviously, Virginia is a place where the politics, it's the first colony, blah 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 blah. But it is a place where there are a lot of capable legal thinkers, and they have, to the extent there's such a thing as a national reputation at this time in our history, they come closest. So that is a gigantic advantage. But James Madison himself, the the two the two other great thinkers of the time, the prominent thinkers of the time, are missing. Adams isn't there, and Jefferson is gone because they're both abroad in diplomatic service. And so, James Madison is becomes a very integral figure eventually, but at this time, he's still kind of a little bit of an obscure Virginia lawyer.
Obscure Virginia lawyer. I like that.
I mean, and weirdly, he becomes a Jefferson proxy, a protege for sure, and almost a proxy eventually.
Yeah.
And at this time, it's not true. Madison is more of a Federalist, and in the context of the Constitutional Convention, probably more closely aligned with someone like Washington, who was presiding and therefore not that expressive, but his thinking seems to fall more in that direction than his subsequent, Kentucky resolve and all the rest of that would come later.
Right. What were the other controversies and sticking points that would be interesting today? I just the idea of the not the voting process for president, right? Which has a balance between the House and the Senate, and maybe it all came from the construction of the House and the Senate, but you hear quite a bit of debate about whether or not that's right or wrong or whatever. I mean, it's a construct and it's what was designed. I don't know if there's a right or wrong, but certainly when my candidate loses because it's not one person, one vote, I get mad and think that the electoral college is wrong. But I don't know that means that it was the wrong thing at the time. I mean, that it should be debated. Well, it should be debated, but that it's inherently wrong. Are there other issues that are like that you think were hot?
Hot, you mean beyond slavery and beyond the big state, small state? Obviously, those things matter. A lot of things are. There are a ton of controversies throughout, and I encourage folks to read the Madison's notes. It's not a long read, but you will come away with a very different perspective on these men and what they thought they were struggling with. The thing that we kind of forget is the revolution ends, and then it is as if in our retelling of American history, we go from the revolution to the Constitutional Convention. But there's actually 10 years of terrible experience in between, or almost 10 years of terrible experience in between the end of the revolution, the Constitutional Convention under the Articles of Confederation. And the reason, and a lot of the reason why things like large state versus small state representation is so important is during that period, the friction between states is really enormous and a little bit dangerous. And so if you're Delaware and you're looking over at Pennsylvania, you're like, these clowns, like I need to, I got to cement my power because they're already trying to treat us like an additional county and trying to control our commerce and all of these other things, kind of heavy-handed things that are happening. And then in addition, the reality that we have rebellions that occur and no standing army. And so the US government is essentially helpless in the face of popular revolt. And a lot of the people who come to the Constitutional Convention are very, very suspicious of people because their experience with direct democracy and a lot of these early constitutions from the states are very much more democratic than ultimately our US Constitution would be. They're like, this is
Democratic defined as one person, one vote.
Democratic defined as one person, one vote. Democratic combined as annual elections in the case of Virginia. Democratic in terms of much more participatory democracy, less representative democracy. And the experience of it wasn't that amazing. I mean, while the American colonies are more literate than a lot of places on Earth at the time, that's not to be confused with, incredible literacy. There's no national media to speak of, so it's hard to know what's going on in Connecticut if you're in North Carolina. It's almost impossible to know the political figures in Connecticut if you're in North Carolina. All of these kind of difficult things, and that one of the things that Madison in particular is very concerned about when we're talking about establishing the Constitution, he's like, well, look, democracies all worked at the city-state level. Like, can we govern a continent or a big chunk of a continent this way? And it was a very much an unknown question.
Yeah. It's extraordinary that it worked out when you think about it that way.
Sure. if it
I
did.
mean, even the Declaration of Independence, right? The 13 colonies that all hated each other, made fun of each other, didn't travel between, and somehow we ended up with this. It's really,
Indeed.
really an extraordinary outcome that I think is anomalous and could not be repeated.
Sad but
Yep.
true. But an amazing example for the world. Transformative, obviously, for human history.
Yeah.
Not just American history, but human history, by injecting this at the time radical notion that people could govern themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly. And then, as you and I and Ananda were talking about this morning, right? Then it couldn't repeat itself perfectly in France. Um, so much more complicated there.
Yeah,
But
France is the counterpoint every time to revolutionary change. I think like
yeah,
it. France is the norm. The American Revolution is the exception.
yeah, agreed. Well, let's close a little bit with your perspective on how the game was received and has been received. Is I assume it's no longer in print. Is that true?
It is wildly out of print, but I'm Fort Circle announced Christian and I are doing something I'm excited about, which is a revised version of the game. We're calling Founding Fathers a More Perfect Union, and the it's going to be a little bit of a constitutional sandbox. Like as we discussed a little bit in Imperial Struggle, the way the United States turned out did not have to be the way the United States turned out, and um, even even though there is this historical narrative that the founding was a conservative, you know, upper middle class revolution to establish the rights of privileged white men, and obviously there are elements of truth in all of that. It is not true that that was necessarily inevitable, or that some of the stuff that got left on the table had to be left on the table. For instance, we don't discuss it, but women had the right to vote in New Jersey before the Constitution,
Yeah.
and well before,
During the war.
during the war.
Yeah.
And as did free black men in some jurisdictions. Like all of these things that we end up having to struggle another century and a half with, or 2 centuries, or we're still struggling, depending on your the question and the point of view. Um, Ideas about those things were circulating. There was an understanding of social justice then, and in this game, you'll be able to play the regular Founding Fathers as it is, but we'll have this extension that allows you to play with some of these concepts, and uses historical persons that were out there and interesting and might have been part of this process but weren't, to talk about some of these additional rights. And we posit that we push the Constitutional Convention just a few years into the future, to after the French Revolution, so that some of the more radical notions of the French Revolution, mandatory public education, all of these kinds of things that end up being part of the first French Constitution, could also have been incorporated into the American Constitution.
Yeah.
And then, in addition, we allow for a lot of expanded actors, in terms of the incorporation of Canada, for instance, which most people wouldn't know, but in the Articles of Confederation, we say that any Canadian province can join the Union, no questions asked. Everybody else has to apply, but if you're a Canadian province, you can come in. As it turns out, sort of anti-Catholic bias in the United States made French Canadians concerned about that idea, and they felt like they were getting a better deal from the British than they would from the United States at the time. So they, the various Canadian provinces opted out for different reasons, but all of this was very seriously considered by very serious people. So it wasn't as if it wasn't on the table. It just isn't how it turned out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's probably a good place to leave it, Jason. Great idea, great game. Just continued brilliance on your part. Much appreciated from all of us. That
You're too kind, sir. As always, I look forward to your next amazing endeavor. We should do something on the revolution together. Oh, I should have said I was this. I have some terrible story, but I won't get into the terrible story. But I was. It did prompt me to do a little bit of work on doing a game about the diplomacy of the American Revolution, and we should do that together.
yeah, I like it. I love it. Let's talk. You have my number, as they say.
Indeed.
And by the way, Kevin Bertram, love what he's doing at Fort Circle. Right, really advancing the ball. I think that you should consider a different name for the game. It's significantly different. And again, I think it's 250 years and we're still not British, right? So with that, Jason, great to talk to you. Thanks for taking the time, and I'll see you later tonight on Ardwolf, I hope.
Good deal. Thanks, sir.
Bye-bye.